Now we're up to the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Amid Beis. A notlin eitzim min hasukah on Yontif. When we're not, again, now it's very confusing here, so make sure we get this point. The sukkah that we're talking about is not the sukkah that you and I just got out of 2 days ago. This is a sukkah, means a hut. And they used to build these huts for Pesach and for Shavuos. And if you take apart the wood of this hut, then you are violating the Isser called Stiras Ohel. Ohel means a tent, and if you take apart a tent, that is a violation of Meleches Soseh. Ella, however, there are certain pieces of wood, and we're going to have to analyze which ones they are, which are called Minas Samachla, and those you're allowed to take. Now, what does Minas Samachla mean? The Gemara is going to have a discussion about this, but let's give a simple answer and interpret it thusly. We're talking about the roof of the hut, and it has what you might call schach, again, not halachic schach, but it has some sort of covering, and on top of that, he puts another covering. So if he takes out the top covering, then he's not being sosa the oil, because the oil still remains, it has a covering. David, did you want to say something? So the Gemara says, Maishno min asukah, why is it that when you take the wood of the sukkah, that's called stiras oil, and that you're not allowed to take off the low, you're not allowed to take it there and remove it to cause sasar all. Well, in the Sefer, with the case of Eitzim and Asamach law, which we said were on the top, and they're lying on top of the schach, they're the higher level on top of the schach, not because sasar all. The Gemara is assuming that you can make a roof on top of a tent that's made of many layers. But all those layers are one on top of the other, and they're all part of the oil, an integral part of the oil. That's the Gemara's assumption here. And if that be the case, then even if you only remove the top level, leaving the bottom level, nevertheless, you're still considered as if you took apart the oil. No, you're wrong. We're not talking about samuch meaning a second level on top of the top level, the bottom, which now becomes the bottom. But what does samuch mean? Samuch lidfanos. Okay, now let's try to explain. The defanos that they used to make in those days did not look anything like our defanos, although we could imitate their defanos. I'm not sure if I ever saw this, but anyway, their defanos were braided. I don't know if anybody has a better word for it. That's the word that I came up with. They were sort of like pieces of soft wood that were woven together, layer upon layer. And now he puts wood on the outside of the defanos, let's say to strengthen the defanos, but without braiding them and weaving them into the fabric of his dofen. Therefore, they remain separate. On the roof, one level of schach, on the other, they're all part of one God. They're all batel to each other. But if he has something that's samoch with defanos, but it's not woven into the defanos, it remains a separate entity. And if he removes that, he has not removed the oil. The oil still remains. Rabbi Menashe, even if you go back to your understanding that the eights and what are these she'ein omdim samach l'fanos, we're not talking about that. But what are we talking about? Now, until now, we said there was a layer of schach that he put on top of the layer of schach. That you're not allowed to touch. Now he's going to say we're talking about kitanya hi be'isuraisa. Isuraisa means rolled bundles of schach, and he didn't untie those bundles, those binds. What's the word I'm looking for? The binding. He didn't unbind the bind. Untie the binding. And as long as he doesn't untie the binding, then it becomes a separate entity. It's not like a flat schach on top of schach. It's just an an object, so to speak, on top of the oil. He's not removing the oil. Tani Rab Chia Bar Yosef. Kami to Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan. Ain't notlin eitzim in a sukkah. Again, we're talking not about a sukkah, as we call it, but a hut, which is used on the Yom Tov of Pesach, the Yom Tov of Shavuos, and you're not allowed to take out the eitzim because of the Isur of Stiras oil. Ella min asamukah. Rabbi Shimon Mati. Rabbi Shimon allows you to take the eitzim even from the schach itself. Apparently, Rabbi Shimon holds that if you add a level of schach on top of schach, it's not batel, it's a separate entity. B'shavin, but even the Tanakh will agree. B'sukas hachag, now we're talking about a sukkah that was made for the mitzvah of sukkahs. B'chag, shasura. You're not allowed to take schach. And by the way, this Isur applies all 7 days of Sukkot, including the 8th day of Sukkot, because Bein Hashmash is going into Shmini Atzeres is also a suffix, maybe it's Sukkot, and we have a principle of that something that's also going in to Bein Hashmashos is also the entire day. So for 8 days, you're not allowed to take the schach. Don't even dream of taking the schach. We'll see about the noise of the decorations. However, the Brisa qualifies. V'im hisna olav, if he made a t'nai, which means that before Yontif of Sukkot, he declared that I will enjoy the benefit of this schach and use it for my own purposes, make a toothpick out of it, is hakol lefi t'no. Then he's allowed, he's permitted to use it. And now the Gemara wants to clarify the statement of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Mati, how could Rabbi Shimon possibly allow you to take the schach off the top? Because sasar oil, he violates the Isur Torah of stiras oil. Amar Nachbar Yitzchak, hacha b'sukkah nofeles askinon. The sukkah had already fallen on Yontif. Once it falls, then there's no stiras oil anymore because you don't have an oil anymore. It already fell. The Tanakhama prohibits it for a different reason. And that is because of the Isur Muktzah, because on Bein Hashmashos going into Sukkot, there was an Isur. He wasn't allowed to take these branches of the schach because he'd be soser oil. And since it was Muktzah, it remains Muktzah the entire Yontif. Rabbi Shimon, however, l'tamei the lesle Muktzah. Rabbi Shimon is mater Muktzah, so therefore you're allowed to take these eitzei schach from the sukkah that fell and use them for your purposes. This time you have a brisa. Mosar Hashem shebener v'shebekarol. You lit a candle with oil on Erev Shabbos, and now the candle went out, it's extinguished. You want to take the extra oil and use it for your own purposes. The Tanakhama, reflecting the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, says asur. It was muktzah because Bein Hashmash is going into Shabbos. There was an Isur Kibu, you weren't allowed to extinguish it, and therefore becomes muktzah for the entire day. Rabbi Shimon matir, which means Rabbi Shimon permits it, and he's not impressed with the fact that it was asur Bein Hashmash. He anticipates that at some point the candle will go out, and he'll then enjoy the sheman, and therefore it's not muktzah. The Gemara says, "Wait a second, meet Domin. What kind of comparison is this? You can't compare a case of a sukkah that fell on sukkahs to the case of a candle that is extinguished. Also, there in the case of the extra surplus oil, Rav Shimon was matir. You're allowed to use that oil because Adam Yoshevu Mitzape. I underline the word Mitzape. Amos Aitifpe Nero. He realizes that he put a large volume of oil in the candle in the nair, and at some point, it's going to extinguish itself. The fire will go out. So for lichabos. And presumably there'll be leftover oil. So he already anticipated going into Shabbos that there would be extra oil. But hacha, in a case where Nebuch is sukkah, al puff, al huff, and al puff, and it fell down, he didn't anticipate that his sukkah would fall down. We had it, by the way, my neighbor's sukkah fell down on Sukkot. What is he, a prophet? And he's waiting for his sukkah to fall apart on Yom Tov? He is anticipating his sukkah to fall down. Why? The sukkah ru'askiran. We're talking about a weak sukkah. It was never built properly. The way Esmol Daiti already on Erev Yom Tov, he anticipated that it would fall. David?
If someone's sukkah does collapse in the winter, the storm, during the holiday, is he obliged to rebuild it? So he has a sukkah still to last the rest of the holiday, or is he now it's just muksa, now we can't touch it?
Well, as far as whether or not he's allowed to use the wood for his own purposes, the Gemara seems to assume it depends on whether you could already have anticipated based on the structure and the kind of wood you use and how tightly you tied it and knocked in the nails and the boragim and all that. And then we could be matir based on Yosef Mitzapeh if we pass like Reb Shimon. However, as far as your other question is concerned, for the balance of the Chag, is he obligated to rebuild a sukkah? That's a sugya, because one man the Omer and the Gemara holds you need a sukkah ru'il l'sheva. It's got to be a 7-day sukkah. But I'm pretty sure I have to look it up in Shulchan Aruch. If you're asking me l'maisa, I would have to research it further. But I think we paskin that you don't need a sukkah l'shiva. You need that the sukkah be royal l'shiva. So he has to build a structure that could theoretically hold for 7 days, even if it's the last day of Sukkot, so he only needs it for 1 day. In any event, the Tanakama holds like Rabbi Yehuda that anything that was not royal shimush bein hashmashos, we're not going to say daito aleh, that he's already anticipating. Like that's why Ner, most of Shem Shebener is asur, according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's muksa, and the same thing will happen even in the case of a sukkah ru'ah that fell on Yom Tov. Now the Gemara is going to analyze the question of using and benefiting from a sukkah, meaning from the wood of a sukkah of sukkahs, of mitzvah. B'shavin, we learned in the Beitza that everybody agrees that the sukkah sachag b'chag hi asura, that you're not allowed to enjoy the benefit of the wood of a sukkah during the entire Chag HaSukkos, all 7 days, even on Chol Hamoed. But if he made a Tanai going into Yom Tov that he would benefit from the walls or the schach of the sukkah, hakol lefi tno. His Tanai, his declaration is valid and he's allowed to benefit. So Gemara asks, Tanai, I don't understand the logic here. Why his declaration should be sufficient to allow using the sukkah? Omar of Cheches, Mishum Rabbi Akiva, Minayin li'atzei sukkah shasurim kol shiva. What is the Torah source, the biblical source, for the Easter of atzei? You're not allowed to benefit from the atzei sukkah all 7 days. Shenemar, and we'll have an alternative drush in a minute, but this drush is based on Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yomim Lashem. Why did the Torah add the word Lashem? Lashem means Hegdesh. Hegdesh, that which was sanctified, Lashem, is Asur B'Noah. And the Sukkah for 7 days is Asur B'Noah, the Sanya. And we learned in the Beitza is an alternative derivation of the same halacha. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, Minayin. How do we know that you're not allowed to benefit at all during Sukkahs from the Atzei HaSukkah and use it for your purposes? Shekshem Shechal Shem Shamayim Ala Chagiga. The Chagiga, as you know, is the carbon that's obligatory every Yom Tov. And the Torah says, with regard to Chag HaSukkos and Parshas Emor, v'chagosem oso Chag Lashem. And the word Chag, the Gemara interprets in Masechet Chagiga, is the carbon Chagiga. And Kachal Shem Shamayim Ala Sukkah, just like there's an Iser Hana on the Chagiga because it's a carbon until after you've maked the Murim, so too there's a Shem Shamayim Chal on the Sukkah. The Sukkah is like a carbon. It has the same status of Iser Hana like a carbon. How do we know this? Talmud Lomar, Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yom Lashem. Emphasize the word Chag. In the first drasha, we emphasize the word Lashem. In the second drasha, Chag. Chag is Lashon Chagiga. And this pasuk has a smichus between Sukkah and the Korban Chagiga to teach us Ma Chag, just like the Korban Chagiga Lashem. It's exclusively dedicated to God. It has an Isser Anoy, not a benefit from a Chagiga. Sukkah, so too it's Lashem, and it's also Ba'anoah. And the Mefarshim want to know, why did Rabbi Yehuda why wasn't he happy with the drasha of Rabbi Akiva? And he says Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was of the opinion that if not for a hechrech lidros hekesh iser atzei sugmano there's another alternative way of learning Lashem, which is Beit Shammai's opinion. Lashem means that the sukkah, the schach of the sukkah has to be put up l'shem sukkah, l'shma. We don't pass on Misham. But that's another possible derivation from Lashem, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira leaves out Rav Sheshes in the name of Rabbi Akiva, and he has his alternative derivation by comparing it to a chagiga. Now, once you give the sukkah the status of hegdesh, and it's also ba'anoah, that you can't have a t'nai. T'nai is not going to help you. You have no control and domination over hegdesh to be matir anoah behegdesh. So how do we understand and justify that t'nai is valid to be lenient? Amar Abanasha, Breder Rava, Seifa, the last part of this price, the Hisna Oleha Hakolafi Tno, that's not referring to the sukkah of sukkahs. El Asam the sukkah bi'alma. This is the hut that he builds for the Yom Tovim, right? And we had a machlok street Tanakama of Shimon, whether you're not are you allowed to take the eitzim from the sukkah that fell if it was a weak sukkah ra'ua. The Tanakama says it's also because there was haktzah ben hashmashos, and Rabbi Shimon said it was mutter. On that, the Beitza adds that even the Tanakama will allow removing the Isur Muktzah if he makes a Tanai. Because once he declares that, as far as I'm concerned, I want to use the wood of this hut, then that's meaningful to remove Muktzah, because then he has a Hachana, he's designated for Bibodo. Aval Sukkah de Mitzvah, everybody would agree, Lo Mahani Beitna. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? There's no such thing as a valid Tanai with regard to Sukkah de Mitzvah. B'chi Sukkah de Mitzvah, lo. The Gemara is asking a rhetorical question. There's no meaningful, valid Tanai that would be matir, enjoying the benefit of the Sukkah. But Tanya, what are you going to do with the Beitza? Now, by the way, this Beitza that we're about to learn would give us a clue as to how they decorated their sukkahs back in the old day. And I saw one or two overlaps with the modern day sukkahs, but some of the celebrations of Noi Sukkah, the beauty sukkah of then, are somewhat distant to our ears. Okay, he put up the right amount of schach, the sukkah is kshera, everything's fine, it's ready for the mitzvah of sukkah. But now the itra. Itra means he beautifies the sukkah. How? Bikrumin. Krumin with a kuf, not with a chaf. And krumin, Rashi identifies as dyed cloth, colored cloth. There's another interpretation here, and that is woven cloth. Ubisdinim. Now, stinim are sheets, and they have to be different than krumim. Otherwise, the Beitza is repeating itself. So what's unique about these dinim? Maybe they're made of white flax or linen, so they don't have that beautiful color that we spoke about before. But mitzuyarin. Mitzuyarin means they actually had artwork, or some say that it was bolate. It was, not just part of the weaving, but it was something that was added and it protruded, and it was beautiful. Different kinds of creative art. We know that Sukkot is a time of artistic creation. Alternatively, what they did to beautify the sukkah is they took small glasses and they filled them up with agozim, with walnuts, shkedim, almonds, afarsikim, or peaches, rimonim, or seeds of a pomegranate, parchile, anovim. Parchile are these moros. They would actually chop off an entire vine. At the end of the vine, there was a cluster of grapes, and they would beautify the schach by attaching these vines with clusters of grapes. You get a clue as to how you might want to beautify your sukkah. And what else did they put into these glasses? Yenos, they put wine in it, probably dark wine, what do you call red wine? I don't know. Shmonim, oils, slotos, different kinds of flour, fine flour. Atros shibolim. This is really interesting to me. What they did was they took kernels of grain, of wheat or whatever it was, and they wove it in an atara. Atara is like a crown. And it was beautiful. And what's the status of all the above nice sukkah? Also, listapik them. You're not allowed to enjoy them and use them for your own benefit. Ad motzai yontif achman shel chag, until after Shmini Atzeres or Chutz La'aretz, after Simchas Torah, which would be today in Chutz, right? Or yesterday. Today. Anyway. But v'im hisna aleim, if when he set up these beautiful nice sukkah on Erev Sukkot going into the Chag, he made a t'nai, and he declared that he's not being makzel somitaito, that he has intention of using them, hakol lefi t'no. So what's going on over here? We just finished saying that with regard to the Atzei HaSukkah, it has a status of Lashem, of Hegdesh, of Chagiga, and Tanai is not meaningful. And yet here we have a whole brisa with all this beautiful noi that he attaches to his chach, and he can make it Tanai. They both agree. The Omer, Eni Bodo Mehem Kol Ben Hashmashos, when he puts up all these beautiful decorations, he says, I'm not separating myself. I'm not giving up and waiving my rights to decide that I might want to use it for my own purposes. So during the entire period of Knisas HaChag of Ben Hashmashos, he still has rights to use them for his own purposes. And therefore, the Kedusha Sukkah is not chal with the moment that the Chag enters, because he was not mevatel zchus at that point. Sukkah, but in the case of the walls or the schach of a sukkah, he doesn't have that option. The chala kedusha alayim. There's already a chalos kedusha during Ben Hashmashos, because this is part of the structure of the sukkah, whether it's the gag in the case of schach, whether it's the definos of the walls. There's no way that he's going to allow himself any sort of access to that Ben Hashmashos, because there's a malacha called soser. If it's part of the structure itself and he now takes it apart, he would be violating stira. So he has to be bodol minei Ben Hashmashos. And therefore the Kedusha will be chal, and it's katzai l'shiva. It's now muktzah for the entire 7 days of the Chag. The Gemara asks, Maishna mehaditma. What are you going to do with the following law that we formulated in the base medrash? Hifrish shiva esrogim l'shiva yomim. He's got 7 different esrogim, one for each day of the Chag. Very fickle person. Omar Rav, call achas v'achas yotzei ba. In each case, he takes the esrog of that day, he shakes it with a daled minute, and then ochlo lialto, he can eat it immediately. In other words, he already fulfilled his chovas mitzvah, and it's no longer muktzah. Rav Asi Omar, call achas yotzei ba v'ochel amach. He's yotzei, but he can't eat it on the same day, because it's muktzah for the entire day. He can only eat it the next day. And now the Gemara asks the following question. In the case of Sukkah, it was huktzah mitzvaso going into the Chagas Sukkos, and even if he made it tonight, it would not be meaningful, because Eitzei HaSukkah become muktzah for all 7 days. Why is Esrog any different? Why is it that in the case of Esrog, it becomes huktzah and it's kadosh, so to speak, only for that 1 day, or maybe even less than 1 day? And the Gemara answers, chasam, in the case of Esrog, the mafseku leilos miyamim, because the law of Esrog only applies, the mitzvah of Esrog only applies when? During the daylight hours, but not at night. And therefore, the night comes and separates one day from the other, called chad v'chad yoma, every day of Sukkot, mitzvah b'yan pei nafshehu. It's a separate, independent mitzvah, and it's separated by the night between the 2 days. And therefore, the Esrog was huktzah only for 1 day, and it's not huktzah kol shiva, because every day is a separate chiyuv and a separate, independent entity. But hacha, in the case of Sukkah, lo mafseki leilos miyamim, the Torah commands us to sit in the Sukkah for all 7 days, no difference between day and night, is kuli yom kechadi yom arichtadami. All the 7 days are like one long day. And once it was huktzah on the first day, it becomes huktzah for all 7. Leads us in Mitzvah Shem to the mission on Daf Lamed Aleph, which we'll see tomorrow. So despite all the technical challenges that we had, we somehow miraculously were able to fit in the entire day.